The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
Cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Trump is guilty. Now for the trial. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. There it is for those of you watching the video version of the show from the New York Post, summarizing the entire impeachment fiasco in 5 words. Guilty. Now for the trial. We'll play back the most revealing moments from this week's Democratic impeachment theater on Capitol Hill, and we'll be joined by LibertyNation.com's sharp-edged political columnist Joe Schaeffer to discuss whether impeachment is helping or hurting the prospects for Trump and the Democrats, and how this impeachment fixation has affected the enormous field of presidential candidates, which incredibly just got larger. Plus, we'll bring on LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza to discuss threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We commenced proceedings with our signature segment, Say What?, as we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians and the chattering class. If you had to pick 2 words or 1 phrase to summarize the commencement of the official impeachment inquiry, which moved from a secret room in the Capitol to the House chamber this week, and this would also neatly summarize the entire Trump presidency, that phrase would be irregular channel. The Democrats' supposed bombshell witness, the star witness, the guy Democrats hoped would captivate the nation on opening day of impeachment season, Ambassador Bill Taylor, spoke of the regular channel of diplomacy, the kind he and his fellow career diplomats are accustomed to, and an irregular channel, which translated means Trump's personal initiatives, which so often are at odds with official long-standing diplomatic protocol. And it's that tension that drove this entire exercise, the tension between the way things have always been done around Washington and the Trump way, which is to upset the establishment apple cart, which is the very thing he was elected to do. Taylor appeared as a respectable establishment figure, but betrayed the usual swamp sensibilities when discussing Trump bypassing him and other foreign policy experts.
I wrote that withholding security assistance in exchange for help with a domestic political campaign in the United States would be crazy. Following the call with President Trump, the member of my staff asked Ambassador Sondland what President Trump thought about Ukraine. Ambassador Sondland responded that President Trump cares more about the investigations of Biden, which Giuliani was pressing for.
So there you go. Trump is crazy. And then later he heard third hand from a staffer through an ambassador who overheard a phone call that Trump cares only about investigating Biden. It's like he heard it through the grapevine, third hand, and is shocked. In fact, the whole narrative, the whole impeachment inquiry is nothing more than a glorified he said, she said, as Republican Jim Jordan effectively revealed in questioning the star witness, Ambassador Taylor, about the phone call that's supposed to be the basis for reversing the 2016 presidential election.
Ambassador, you weren't on the call, were you? You didn't listen on President Trump's call and President Zelensky's call?
I did not.
You've never talked with Chief of Staff Mulvaney?
I never did.
You never met the president?
That's correct.
He had 3 meetings again with Zelensky and it didn't come up.
And 2 of those they had never heard about, as far as I know.
And
there was no reason for it.
President Zelensky never made an announcement. This is what I can't believe. And you're their star witness. You're their first witness.
Mr.
You're
Jordan,
the guy. You're the guy based on this. I've seen church prayer chains that are easier to understand than this.
So then the question becomes, was there a legitimate reason for Trump wanting Biden investigated? Hello, the guy's son profited hugely, $50,000 a month at least, and a spot on the board of Ukraine's biggest energy company, despite no experience in Ukraine, no experience in energy. A deal cut right after Biden left Ukraine. And then Biden threatened to do exactly what Trump's being accused of, cut off funding for Ukraine unless they fired the prosecutor investigating, wait for it, Hunter Biden's company. No basis for investigation? Yeah, right. No basis. Another question. How do you impeach a president for something he might have done but didn't? They claim there was a quid pro quo, lethal aid, and a White House meeting for the Ukrainian President Zelensky in return for a publicly announced investigation of Joe Biden. But the investigation hasn't happened, and the lethal aid was delivered on schedule. But it's all more than enough for Nancy Pelosi, Adam Schiff, and the Democrats to ignore the transparent corruption of their leading presidential candidate, ignore the fact that aid was in fact delivered to Ukraine by Trump, and ignore that no investigation was announced, and go ahead and pull the trigger on impeachment anyway, less than a year before a presidential election with not a single Republican vote in the House and no prospects for conviction in the Senate. Now, in contrast, 33 Democrats voted for the impeachment inquiry into President Clinton, and every Republican except 4 voted for the impeachment inquiry into President Nixon. Now, Schiff understands that he may get impeachment, but he's not going to get a conviction and removal from office, barring new bombshell information, which would have long since been leaked to the impeachment-obsessed elite media if it was there. So he's already, Schiff, trying to lay the groundwork for the same charge the Democrats came up with when the Russia collusion hoax was laid bare: obstruction.
If the president can simply refuse all oversight, particularly in the context of an impeachment proceeding, the balance of power between our 2 branches of government will be irrevocably altered.
See what he did there? And that was in his opening statement. Emphasized Trump's refusal to let his closest advisors testify. So when outrage over the phone call between Trump and the Ukrainian president dissipates, as is already happening, he can always fall back on obstruction. But when the ranking Republican on the Intelligence Committee, Devin Nunes, delivered his opening statement, he talked about the Russia collusion hoax and the endless witch hunts against Trump that have come up empty.
We're supposed to take these people at face value when they trot out a new batch of allegations. But anyone familiar with the Democrats' scorched earth war against President Trump would not be surprised to see all the typical signs that this is a carefully orchestrated media smear campaign.
The lawyer for the alleged whistleblower, and everyone in D.C. knows who he is, but pretends that they don't, including Adam Schiff, who specifically denied knowing who the whistleblower is, even though he contacted Schiff's staff first with his complaint. Such a bold-faced lie. So, the lawyer for this guy was calling for Trump's impeachment the same month Trump was inaugurated, almost 3 years ago. That would be January of 2017. But never mind that. Here's a question no one seems to be asking. Democrats still claim to this day that Trump is an agent of Russia and Vladimir Putin. If that's true, why in God's name would Trump be sending lethal aid to the country Russia's trying to overrun? Lethal aid for Ukraine, by the way, refused by the Obama administration for all 8 years. But, we've seen this swamp revolt against a president's irregular channels before. Take you back to President Ronald Reagan, whose most famous single statement was, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." The State Department tried repeatedly to remove those words from Reagan's statement at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin, but he persisted, and the wall came down 2 years later. Likewise, official Washington was appalled when Reagan walked away from a deal that would eliminate U.S. and Soviet nuclear weapons up in Reykjavik, Iceland, because he would have had to dismantle his much-vaunted Strategic Defense Initiative, commonly known as Star Wars, which had the Soviets on the run and killing their economy to keep up. The State Department was outraged. A few years later, the Soviet Union ceased to exist. That, my friends, is the politics of personal diplomacy, or Lone Ranger diplomacy, if you will, from Reagan to Trump. And that is the resistance we will witness in perpetuity from an unelected foreign policy and domestic establishment that truly believes they, not the elected president, are the repositories of wisdom. They, not the elected president, are the ones who know best. And they, not the elected president, should be deciding what America's foreign policy should be. Problem is, that's the exact reverse of what the voters voted for in 2016 and may well reaffirm in 2020. So this whole impeachment fiasco is having a heavy downdraft on the Democrats' presidential race. Is impeachment their only issue? Is it enough? And why are more candidates entering the race this late in the game? We'll come back and discuss it all with LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer in just a moment.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
We believe that all men are entitled to blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Well, the Democrats have made their impeachment bed and are now sleeping in it, starting with Wednesday's first hearing by Adam Schiff in the House Intelligence Committee. Did the Democrats help themselves with their first rush out of the gate? Did they hurt themselves? Did it make no difference? Is that even possible? Joining us to sharpen our perspective on this latest attempt to overthrow the results of the 2016 election is LibertyNation.com political columnist Joe Schaeffer. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Well, a pleasure as always. So, Joe, the Democrats were hanging their impeachment hat on a big first day from Ambassador Bill Taylor. Did he produce the goods? Did anything really change?
Well, I may not be the right person to ask because, I feel a lot of Americans, I tuned out on most of it. It was boring. It was baked. It was pre-contrived. I thought everyone's got their minds made up on this already. And I think that comes across. And, of course, this is all excellent for President Trump because he wants to portray this as being an orchestrated campaign, and that's exactly as it came across. So you have these career diplomats, this establishment media, all tied in together And it comes across that way to the American people. Even if they don't know those facts, it comes across that way.
Well, Ambassador Taylor came off as a sort of very respectable figure when he was being questioned by Democrats. But when Republicans put him under the Klieg lights, he was very hesitant to say anything about potential motives. And the whole thing came down to what he kept describing as an irregular channel of foreign diplomacy or foreign policy.
And why exactly is that a crime? Especially since 60 million Americans voted for Donald Trump because they want change. They want something different. They want irregular. So, these are career diplomats who disagree with this president's policies, and they think that they are a government within the government, and that for some reason they get to make a judgment call on this. You serve at the privilege of the president. It's his policies that he's in the White House to enact, not theirs. And so I don't see how having bow-tied career diplomats talking about they come from a family of diplomats, yes, really going to impress Americans in Iowa and in the Midwest about the need to let these people run our government instead of the president.
But Joe, certainly you're impressed by the fact that, as he said, there's been a George Kent in the Washington establishment for more than 60 years. If you had to put together a composite of the kind of guy that Americans who voted for Trump didn't want to see any more of, it would be that kind of guy. Now, they came off as somewhat respectable, I suppose, but there was no bombshell. There was nothing to excite the senses of the American people like there was, as you and I recall, during the Nixon impeachment, where the whole nation was transfixed on it, and the Clinton impeachment, where the nation was a whole lot more transfixed than it is now. But of course, this time you had 0 Republicans voting for impeachment, which is unprecedented, making it a completely partisan exercise. So let me ask you this. Does this impeachment taking place, and this is unprecedented too, taking place less than a year before a presidential election, mean that the Democrats are saying this is our only issue and we're going to run on this alone in 2020?
It certainly appears that way, and what an indictment of them. They're not offering the American people anything except for this lockstep Trump opposition, and they're tying themselves in with a thoroughly discredited deep state that Trump won the election by campaigning against. So besides that, what do they have to offer? A lot of left-wing progressive talking points that most mainstream Americans don't care about. They don't have any real plans to help with the real problems Americans have: jobs, security, being able to afford to raise a family in this country. They don't want to talk about those things. They just want to. Trump is destroying, whatever they feel is the way a government should be run, and we have to stop Trump, and we have to. And what are you standing for? They've never really been able to answer that question, and they won't be able to.
Okay, Joe, well, we'll leave it there and pick it up next time, but thanks as always for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Joe Schaeffer, political columnist for LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
So we discussed with Joe Schaeffer in the last segment the state of play in the Democrats' presidential race. Former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg looks ready to jump into the race, somehow believing that a billionaire capitalist can win a primary race dominated by radical socialist ideas like the Green New Deal and Medicare for All. Already, another Democrat officially entered the fray this week, the latest entry ever into a presidential primary. And then there's the most familiar name of all still making noises about getting in, and we'll talk about her. This all points to the rather elementary conclusion the Democrats themselves believe none of their current candidates, from socialists like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to relative moderates or traditional liberals like Joe Biden and Amy Klobuchar, I suppose, can unseat President Trump, or we wouldn't be hearing about all these last-minute candidacies. The newest official entry in the race is former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick, the apparent favorite of the Obamas. They urged him to run last time and this time, and after announcing earlier this year that he wouldn't run, he's changed his mind and jumped in. And already Governor Patrick is being attacked for the job he took after leaving the governorship of Massachusetts at Bain Capital. Ironically, the very company associated with a man who was both Patrick's predecessor as Massachusetts governor and Republican presidential candidate so heavily attacked by Obama in 2012, Mitt Romney. And Patrick's now out there trying to show he's down with wokeness while distancing himself from one of the key attack lines of the very campaign he co-chaired in 2012.
I love that the party has moved to the left. I love that we are the party of the woke. I believe that we also have to be the party of the still waking. Yes, I work at the place that was demonized in the 2012 presidential election. And
by
I
your
remember
party,
it because
by your side.
Because I'm about to tell you, you may remember I was co-chair of that campaign. And I didn't buy into it then, and I still don't.
Hard to understand how a guy could be so close to the Obamas, co-chair their re-election campaign where one of the leading attack lines was on Bain Capital, and then say he never bought into it. But who knows? In this primary race, almost anything can happen. You've got pure socialists, modified socialists, social justice warriors, 20th century liberals, likely a billionaire capitalist, and now talk of that woman. Again, Hillary Clinton, who went on BBC this week and sounded ready to give it another go.
As I say, never say never. And I will certainly tell you I'm under enormous pressure from many, many, many people to think about it.
Many people want a replay of 2016. Really? Hey, sounds about as plausible, I guess, as any of these other candidates. But before they nominate anyone, maybe the Democrats ought to decide who they are and what they want to be. Socialists, liberals, capitalists, social justice warriors, doves, war hawks, which seems to be their latest iteration. Meanwhile, forgetting even the radical left-wing resistance to President Trump, if you want to get an idea of what President Trump has been dealing with inside his own administration, consider what's written in a new book released by Trump's former UN ambassador, Nikki Haley. She says that Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson actively undermined Trump under the guise of saving the country and tried to recruit her to go along. A most inflammatory charge, to which Tillerson replied that he did nothing to undermine Trump. Haley responded on Fox News.
I mean, that's so Rex. You know, it's typical, and I'm not going to fight over it. If you notice, both he and Kelly, neither one of them denied sitting me down and saying that. And I was in multiple National Security Council meetings where we vetted multiple issues. Ask other people in the administration. Right. Ask H.R. McMaster. He knows that it happened.
Were you in many meetings with him?
Yes, of course I was. You know, when you're a cabinet member, you're in cabinet meetings, National Security Council meetings, Oval Office meetings.
So if you think the resistance to Trump comes only from outside his administration and not from within, think again. And as Trump heads into his re-election campaign, the best thing the resistance has going for it, of course, is the media, always looking for the latest shocker on Trump to signal their virtue and juice their ratings. Here now is a conversation this week which typifies CNN and their fellow biased media outlets. It's between Wolf Blitzer, once lampooned somewhere on TV as Wolfgang Blitzkrieg, and presidential advisor and whipping girl for the media hordes, Kellyanne Conway, on the matter of anti-Trump statements by Kellyanne's husband, George Conway, on CNN's competitor, MSNBC.
I don't want to talk about your marriage. I know that there are issues there. Your husband, George Conway, is a lawyer.
What did you just say?
Your husband, George Conway.
Did you just say there are issues there? You don't want to talk about marriage?
I don't want to talk about. No, I don't want to talk.
Why did you say that?
I don't want to talk about your marriage. I don't want to talk about your. I want to talk about a substantive point that your husband, George Conway, made. He was on television all day yesterday.
We've heard things like that said on CNN for 3 years. What you just quoted is said every single day by other voices, but you wanted to put it in my husband's voice because you think somehow that that'll help your ratings or that you're really sticking it to Kellyanne Conway. And let me make very clear, you didn't stick it to Kellyanne Conway. I think you embarrassed yourself, and I'm embarrassed for you because this is CNN now, and now the news is what somebody's husband says.
Do you know how many times...
One wonders if CNN is even a bit embarrassed by the succession of sensational bombshell allegations aired on their channel, which turned out to be false. But that's probably the wrong question. Instead, we should probably be asking whether CNN is even capable of embarrassment, not to mention shame. I, for one, am neither embarrassed nor ashamed to ask who's really running this narrative, this impeachment inquiry, this whole nonstop blitzkrieg on the White House. The Democrats, yes, they're pushing the buttons, but isn't it really the media lackeys like CNN? Think about this. If the media was not fueling this narrative, cooperating and spouting the Democrats' exact talking points, if they were just balanced, not biased in either direction, which is, of course, the purpose of affording them the protections in the First Amendment. If they were just neutral, would this whole impeachment business even be able to proceed on course? Would the American people really favor impeachment of a duly elected president for a phone call and for an alleged crime he did not commit, namely withholding aid which was delivered, after making a demand of Ukraine which was not met and then dropped? If the media actually delivered a fair recitation of all the facts, including the obvious corruption involving Joe Biden and his son Hunter, the answer is no. It would not be possible. So you can blame the Democrats for pushing impeachment, but the whole thing could not happen without the aid and comfort of a flagrantly and proudly biased media. And we'll take a quick break and come back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Where can you find honest political commentary with sobering analysis, accountability, deconstructing threats to our liberty, and boldly reporting the truth? Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where facts matter.
And now we welcome you to the portion of Liberty Nation Radio which we entitle Talkin' Liberty, and it's when we reintroduce ourselves to our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
All right, let's jump right in. A U.S. judge rules suspicionless searches of travelers' electronic devices are unconstitutional. You think?
Well, you and I may think so, Tim, but the United States government did not think so, both in the administrations of President Obama and President Trump. Under both administrations, they ruled they pushed the notion that they were entitled to look through travelers' devices at international border crossings, even though they were U.S. citizens and had done nothing wrong or were accused of doing nothing wrong.
And so now it means that a random person can't come up to you and demand that you turn over your smartphone.
Devices, please, right? No, that is forbidden here. What the judge has said, this is an Obama appointee, by the way, has said that we need to see a showing of reasonable articulable suspicion that the devices in question contain some contraband or something illegal is going on. Now, they are allowed to make sure that you own the device. They're allowed to make sure that it is, in fact, an electronic device and not some destructive device, for instance, right? It's not about safety, but your papers, you can imagine, Tim, well, you don't have to imagine, Tim, all of the personal information that is located on your electronic device. And to let somebody to look through that simply as a condition to re-enter a place where you have a legal right to be, which is to say the United States, this is not about foreigners, this is about U.S. citizens. So I think it's a great ruling and much needed.
It's really one of these rulings where you say, well, wait a minute. How could that ruling not have stood for a lot longer than just this week? But in fact, this is the kind of thing that we have Talking Liberty for. And Scott Cosenza.
It's one of those things where I think people are surprised to learn that that was the law in the first place,
Yes, indeed. Now, guns, Sandy Hook, lawsuit, continuing, Supreme Court won't take appeal. Bring all of those pieces together for us.
All right. So many of the families of the slain at Sandy Hook and some of the survivors of that massacre have sued the company that now owns the company that made the gun. Okay, Bushmaster was the name of the gun that Mr. Lanza used to murder so many up there. Remington is the name of the company that now owns that name, Bushmaster. So Sandy Hook families suing Remington. They say, you made the gun that did all the massacring. You should have to pay for it. Remington says, we don't have to even entertain this lawsuit because of the federal law that grants protection for gun companies so that they can make guns without having to defend against lawsuits from murderers, basically. In other words, there was a criminal intervening factor, right? It's not about like a typical liability suit where I sell you a car and the wheels fall off. No, the firearm worked as it should have. It was just used for nefarious purposes. So the families say, well, we want to sue anyway because there's an exception to the law that says if they broke the law in their gun sales, then we can sue them and they don't enjoy that civil protection. Well, what they're alleging broke the law, Tim, in part was just the marketing of an AR-15 to a civilian population at all. Part of the theory of the case is that civilian populations should not own AR-15s. So they say to the Supreme Court, will you please intercede before this case goes on any further? We shouldn't even have to mount a defense here. It's called an interlocutory appeal. So the Connecticut court where this case resides hasn't made a ruling on their liability. They just say to Remington, you better come to court and defend yourself. Well, the Supreme Court says we're not going to weigh in at this point. We've denied your cert petition. We're going to let it play out in the Connecticut Supreme Court. So I suspect, Tim, we're going to see it again. We're going to have to wait until Connecticut rules on it one way or another, and it'll come back through.
And of course, there's so much at stake because if gun manufacturers can be sued for the actions of somebody that owns one of their weapons, then all bets are off. And gun manufacturers, I think you just project out a couple of years and they'll all be thrown right out of business.
This will, if allowed to stand, completely decimate and eliminate commercial gun sales in the United States. There will be some very boutique manufacturers, to be sure, but any of the workaday gun sellers, they'll be out of business. Toot sweet.
No question. And it won't take long either, because the number of lawsuits that will come down on any of these companies that are ultimately found liable at the level of the Supreme Court, you can expect them to start going into Chapter 11 or 13 or whatever almost immediately. Now let's move to the subject of George Soros, who spent an awful lot of money spreading money around during the last election and now several elections, and his investments are paying huge dividends, as you wrote about on Liberty Nation this week.
Well, Tim, we talked about before the elections that there weren't many, nationally focused elections this November, but there were a lot of prosecutor elections. We talked about Northern Virginia, Tim. All four of the big county population-wise in Northern Virginia are now seen to by Soros prosecutors. So his dividends did pay off. The money he spent on these races, the population numbers are about the same as Houston, Texas, for instance, in terms of the metro area, to give you a sense of it. And we're going to see now a major change in the way so many people are, how the criminal justice system deals with them. This elimination of cash bail, refusal to prosecute certain drug crimes. It's going to be a major change in the liberty and the lives of many.
And he will keep it coming, too. And the relevant point to make, too, is that his investments in terms of local communities and races that go down as far as the prosecutor or sheriff level is far greater than any conservative organization or funding source, so that he's getting a huge grassroots advantage. Okay, Scott, let's move on to this story about a city clerk ordered to pay $42,000 for refusing a records request.
Tim, this warms the hearts of anybody who's ever tried to knock up against City Hall, who are required to, under the Sunshine Law of Missouri. This case is out of Missouri, a suburb of Kansas City called Raytown. And what happened is the city clerk refused to give out standard traffic records that were required to be released under the Sunshine Laws. That person's name is Teresa Henry. She's going to have to pay over $40,000 in damages and attorney's fees. And, it's not the Lindbergh kidnapping in terms of cases, Tim, but I think this is the kind of thing that just it drives people nuts. They have a legal right to information. She was researching traffic studies regarding an intersection where her mother died in a car accident. She wanted that information. She had a legal right to it. But the city employees use every possible way not to let the citizen get access to the information, which is what one would expect, but to frustrate that access. And that's what Teresa Henry did, and that's why she has to pay. And I think that, at least in Missouri, people who go up to their city clerk's window with an information request are going to be greeted a little differently in the days to come.
Finally, Scott, before we leave, give us the latest on multiple efforts to secure Donald Trump tax documents.
Well, Tim, the very latest is it looks like multiple Supreme Court cases may be the result of those multiple efforts. We have the New York District Attorney Cyrus Vance and House Democrats both seeking on sort of separate tracks to gain access to the president's personal tax returns. And he was ordered by appellate courts on both tracks that he must submit those returns. The latest is that his attorney, Jay Sekulow, said they're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. We expect those filings momentarily, and we're going to have to wait and see how the court deals with them.
Okay. Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott, and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose with Mark Angelides. All of it available on demand at LibertyNation.com and from fine podcast providers everywhere. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. In the meantime, this is Tim Donner saying, stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.
Exhausted by all the fake news? On LibertyNation.com's YouTube channel, facts and fresh, bold analysis are what you get without the leftist spin. Subscribe today to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, because
truth is
making
come back.